A single second can feel like an infinity when it carries the weight of a life-changing choice and deep emotion. We capture those eternal moments and turn them into cinematic art for your viewing pleasure. Hit subscribe now and explore the infinite nature of the human story with us.
The call came at 2:47 inches the morning. I know the exact time because I had been lying awake anyway. The way I always do when something sits wrong in my chest and I can't name what it is. My daughter had seemed off at Sunday dinner 3 weeks before. She laughed at the right moments, refilled everyone's glasses, cut the pie into perfect slices. But when she thought no one was watching, she pressed her fingers against her left forearm and held them there, like she was checking for something underneath the skin. I hadn't said anything. I told myself I was imagining it. The phone lit up on the nightstand and her name crossed the screen, and I already knew, in the way that fathers know things they have spent months refusing to accept, that the night I had been dreading had finally arrived. "Daddy." Her voice was barely a whisper. "I need you to come get me." She was standing at the corner of Elm and Morrison, 2 blocks from the house I had helped her and my son-in-law move into 4 years ago. It was 31 degrees outside. She had no coat. My granddaughter, who had just turned 6, was wrapped inside my daughter's cardigan, half asleep against her shoulder. My grandson, 8 years old and trying very hard to look like none of this scared him, stood beside them, holding a plastic grocery bag, with what I later found out were 3 changes of clothes, 2 juice boxes, and a stuffed rabbit that belonged to his sister. My son had packed that bag. 8 years old. And he already knew how to prepare for the nights, when leaving was the only option. I want you to understand something about the moment I pulled up to that corner and saw the 3 of them standing under a streetlight. My daughter looked at me and then looked away fast, the way people do when they are ashamed of something that was never their fault. Her left eye was swollen nearly shut. There was a bruise along her jaw that was already turning the deep purple red of something that had been building for a long time before it finally broke the surface. I did not say anything about it right away. I got out of the car. I took my grandson's bag. I buckled my granddaughter into the back seat while my daughter got in the front, and I turned the heat on full, and I drove. I have been a retired federal investigator for 11 years. Before that, I spent 26 years working financial crimes, fraud, interstate wire cases. I have interviewed men who ruined thousands of lives and felt nothing about it. I have sat across tables from people who could look you in the eye and lie with a steadiness that most people reserve for telling the truth. I know how deception works. I know how it builds. I know every stage of it. And I had let it happen to my own daughter inside my son-in-law's house for 4 years because I told myself the signs I was reading were something else. That is the part I will carry for the rest of my life. Her name is Lily. She is 34 years old. She has her mother's eyes and her grandmother's stubbornness and a laugh that has always been able to stop a room. She met my son-in-law, Marcus, at a fundraiser she had organized for the hospital where she worked as an intake coordinator. He was charming in the particular way that certain men are charming, not flashy, not obvious, but steady and attentive in a way that made you feel like you were the only person in the room he wanted to talk to. I liked him. In the beginning. I want to be honest about that because I think it matters. He shook my hand firmly, remembered details from previous conversations, showed up early and stayed late. He called me sir for the first 6 months and then, after I told him he didn't need to do that, he switched to calling me by my first name and somehow made that feel like an even greater sign of respect. I think about all of it differently now. The first thing that pulled at me was at their engagement party. Lily had planned to wear a blue dress. She mentioned it to me twice in the weeks before. Described it in that specific way. People describe things they are genuinely excited about. She arrived at the party in a different dress, a cream-colored one, very pretty but clearly not what she had chosen. I asked her about it later, casually, and she said she had just changed her mind. She said it the way people say things when they have learned that changing their mind is easier than explaining their original choice. I noted it and set it aside. Over the following years, I noted many things and set them aside. Lily stopped hosting Thanksgiving. She stopped going to the book club she had attended for 6 years. She called less. And when she did call, She had a habit of pausing mid-sentence, as if checking the words before they left her mouth. When I came to visit, Marcus was always there, always pleasant, always finding natural ways to be present in every room. I told myself he was attentive. I told myself he loved her. I should have trusted what I had spent 26 years learning to read. The morning after I picked them up, I made breakfast for my grandchildren and sent them to watch cartoons in the living room. Then I sat down across from my daughter at my kitchen table and I put a cup of coffee in front of her and I said, "You don't have to explain anything right now, but I need to know if this has happened before." She wrapped both hands around the mug. She stared at the steam rising from it. "The physical part," she said finally, "started about 8 months ago." She paused. "The rest of it started much earlier." We sat there for a long time. She talked and I listened. I did not interrupt her. I did not tell her what I thought or what I wanted to do. I just let her say all of it. Every piece of it, including the parts that were hard for her to say because they required her to admit she had known things were wrong and had stayed anyway. I understood why she had stayed. Fear is not simple. Love does not stop being love just because the person you love is hurting you. I had worked enough cases to understand that the women who stayed were not weak. They were surviving inside a system that someone else had built around them while they weren't paying attention. When she finished, I asked her 3 questions. Where were the children when it happened? Whether she had told anyone, a doctor, a coworker, anyone. And whether she wanted to press charges. She had shielded the children every time. She had not told anyone. And yes, she said, looking at me with her mother's eyes. Yes, she wanted to press charges. "Okay," I said. I stood up. "Then we're going to do this right." I want to explain what I mean by that. Because doing it right was the most important decision I made in all of it. I was not going to drive to that house. I was not going to confront Marcus in a way that would compromise any legal case, hand him grounds for dismissal, or give his lawyer something to work with. I was not going to let my anger make a single move that would cost my daughter her chance at a clean outcome. I had watched that happen too many times to too many families who acted from emotion instead of strategy. I had watched guilty men walk free because someone who loved the victim had stepped wrong. I was not going to be that story. What I was going to do was build an unassailable case. First, I drove Lily to the emergency room. I sat with the children in the waiting room while a nurse photographed her injuries and a physician documented them, and I made sure she understood she could speak freely and that everything she said would be recorded accurately. The attending physician noted contusions consistent with being struck and fingers marks along her wrist consistent with restraint. This was the second documented instance of treatment for injuries, as it turned out. There had been an urgent care visit 7 months prior that Lily had attributed to a fall. I asked the hospital to pull that record and flag the inconsistency. They did. Second, I called a friend of mine. I will call him Ray, which is not his name, but he will know who he is if he ever reads this. Ray had worked domestic violence prosecution in this state for 19 years before moving into private legal advocacy. He met us at a diner 2 mornings later, sat across from Lily with a yellow legal pad, and spent 2 hours asking her the kind of questions that build a timeline. What happened? When? Where? Who else was present? What the children witnessed? What financial control looked like? What the pattern had been? Because there was a pattern, Marcus had been methodical. Isolation first, then financial. Then, when those mechanisms were fully in place and Lily had lost the footing to leave, the physical, Ray told her what her options were. He told her what the process would look like. He did not minimize it or make it sound easier than it was, and I respected him enormously for that. He told her there would be hard days. He told her the goal was a protective order first, criminal charges second, and a civil case regarding marital assets third, and that each of those required different documentation and different patience. Lily took notes on her phone. She asked good questions. Watching her, I felt something shift in me, not relief. It was too early for relief, but a recognition that the woman my daughter had been before Marcus had not disappeared. She had been compressed. She was starting to take up space again. Third, I called my son-in-law. I want to be very clear about this call. I made it deliberately. I made it because I needed to hear how he spoke when he thought he was in control of the situation, and because I needed him to believe, for exactly long enough, that this was going to be handled quietly within the family. I told him Lily and the children were safe. I told him she needed some time. I told him I hoped we could resolve things calmly. He was smooth. He expressed concern. He said he was worried about her mental state. He said the children needed stability. He used the word stability 4 times in 6 minutes, which is a frequency that means something when you have spent decades listening to how people construct narratives under pressure. He made one mistake. He said, "Whatever she's told you, you know how she gets." I wrote that down word for word. Over the following 2 weeks, Marcus made a series of decisions that I believe he thought were strategic and that were, in fact, the methodical dismantling of his own position. He froze the joint checking account, which documented financial control in a way that his lawyer later struggled to explain. He sent Lily 17 text messages in 4 days, ranging in tone from conciliatory to threatening, all of which were preserved and time-stamped. He called the children's school to report that Lily was emotionally unstable and should not be permitted to pick them up without his authorization, a call that the school principal documented, and that became part of the school blang record. And he told at least 2 mutual acquaintances, unprompted, that Lily had a history of exaggeration and emotional instability. Every one of those things had the shape of a man who was used to being believed, and who could not yet conceive of a situation in which the mechanisms that had protected him were no longer operating. The protective order was granted 18 days after Lily and the children came to my door. I was sitting in the courthouse hallway when it was issued. Lily came out of the courtroom, and I stood up and she walked straight to me and put her forehead against my shoulder the way she used to do when she was small and had a bad dream. And I put my arm around her, and I did not say anything because there was nothing that needed to be said in that moment. What came next was slower and harder, as Ray had told us it would be. The criminal process took the shape of most criminal processes. That is to say, it was not a television story. It was months of continuances and motions and pretrial hearings, and a great deal of waiting in hallways that all looked the same. Marcus hired a competent attorney who made predictable arguments. The physical evidence was strong. Lily was a strong witness. The pattern documentation Ray had helped her build was, I think, the most significant element. Prosecutors liked having not just an incident but a system. It was harder to present as a misunderstanding when there was a timeline. Marcus pled guilty to 1 count of domestic battery and 1 count of criminal coercion. I sat in the courtroom when the sentence was handed down. I will not tell you it was everything I wanted, because it was not. No sentence for what was done to my daughter and to my grandchildren inside a house that was supposed to be safe will ever feel like it fully accounts for what it cost them. But he pled guilty. He did not get to stand in front of a jury and perform innocence. He did not get to make Lily sit on the stand and be interrogated about her credibility while he looked sympathetic in a suit. She did not have to go through that, and that mattered to me enormously. He was sentenced to 18 months, with credit for time served during pretrial. He would be on supervised probation for 4 years after release, with a permanent restraining order, mandatory batterer's intervention, and no unsupervised contact with the children pending a separate family court determination. The family court determination took another 7 months. In the meantime, my daughter and my grandchildren lived with me. I want to tell you about that time, because I think it is the part of this story that gets left out most often. People want to hear about the confrontation, the evidence, the legal outcome. Those things matter. But what I remember most from those months is not any of them. I remember my grandson teaching himself to make pancakes on Saturday mornings because he decided that was going to be his job. He was meticulous about it. He watched 3 different YouTube tutorials before he was satisfied with his approach. He left the kitchen cleaner than he found it every single time. I remember my granddaughter asking me about 6 weeks in whether the bad man was going to come back. I told her no. I told her there were papers that said he had to stay very far away, and that if he ever didn't follow those papers, people whose whole job it was to make sure he followed them would come and make sure. She thought about that for a moment. Then she picked up the stuffed rabbit she had carried out of that house in the dark and went back to what she was doing. I remember my daughter calling a friend she had not spoken to in 3 years. I heard her through the kitchen door, her voice uncertain at first, and then gradually becoming something closer to the voice I remembered. The call lasted 2 hours. She was laughing by the end of it. I remember making dinner one night. The 4 of us, my granddaughter setting the table with the seriousness she brought to all tasks. My grandson already at his station by the stove, Lily sitting at the counter with a glass of water and her laptop open to her work email for the first time in months. The television was on in the other room. The dog was underfoot. It was an ordinary evening, unremarkably ordinary in every way. And I stood there for a moment and felt the specific weight of understanding how much ordinary had cost them. Lily went back to work full-time 4 months after moving in. She started therapy, which I had gently encouraged, and she had arrived at in her own time. She reconnected with the book club. She and a colleague from the hospital launched a peer support group for women navigating abuse situations, meeting twice monthly in a conference room on the 3rd floor. She did not ask my permission or my opinion about any of these things. She told me about them afterward, the way an adult tells a parent about their life. My grandchildren started at a new school in the fall. My grandson joined the science club. My granddaughter made a best friend within 2 weeks and reported that her friend had a dog named Biscuit and that this was, in her considered opinion, the best dog name she had ever heard. The family court granted Lily primary physical custody with structured visitation for Marcus to begin after the completion of his intervention program, subject to review. The marital assets, including the equity in the house, were divided in a settlement that Ray described as favorable given the financial coercion documentation. Lily found an apartment with a 2nd bedroom and a small yard. My grandchildren helped her paint the living room a color called warm fog, which appeared to be a medium gray, but which all 3 of them were very enthusiastic about. They moved in on a Saturday in late October. I carried boxes. My grandson lost a fight with a bookshelf on the stairs and won the rematch. My granddaughter declared her bedroom the best room in the history of rooms. I drove home that evening through streets that were going gold and orange the way they do every fall here in this part of the country. And I thought about the things I should have done differently. I have spent a considerable amount of time with that particular list. I should have trusted my instincts earlier. I noticed the pattern long before I named it, and I told myself I was seeing what I expected to see rather than what was actually there. I was wrong about that. The things I had spent a career learning to read were reading correctly, and I owed my daughter more attention than I gave her. I should have found a way to tell Lily, years before, what the red flags were. Not to frighten her, not to plant suspicion where there was none, but because the most effective protection I could have given her was a fluency in what coercive control looks like in its early stages, before it becomes the air inside the house. I did not do that. I assumed that love was a sufficient alarm system. It isn't. Love is exactly what people like Marcus use to make the alarm system doubt itself. I should have asked her, sooner and more directly, whether she was okay. Not in the way you ask a question when you're hoping for a particular answer, but in the way that makes space for the truth. She told me later that there were moments when she had wanted me to ask. She didn't know what she would have said, or whether she was ready to say it. But she wanted me to ask. I tell you all of this not because I think it excuses anything, but because I think it might be useful. If you are a parent reading this, trust what you notice. Ask the real question. Make sure the people you love know what controlling behavior looks like before it looks like everything. The night I picked them up at the corner of Elm and Morrison, I made a phone call before I went to sleep. It was after 4 in the morning. I sat in the kitchen with the house quiet and I called my older sister, who had been a family court advocate for 22 years and who had heard versions of this story more times than I could count. I told her what had happened. I told her what I was planning to do. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You do it right, and you do it for her, not for you. Your anger is yours to manage. Her case is hers to own." I wrote that down too. There is one more thing I want to tell you. About 3 months after Lily moved into the apartment with the warm fog living room, she called me on a Tuesday afternoon. Not a Sunday, not a birthday, not any day that had a reason attached to it. Just a Tuesday. She asked if I wanted to come over for dinner. She said she was making pot roast, which was a recipe she had gotten from her grandmother, my mother, who had been gone for 12 years. She had never made it before. She wanted to try. I said yes. I drove over in the early evening. My grandchildren let me in with the particular noise that grandchildren bring to the opening of doors. The apartment smelled like something that had been cooking slowly all afternoon, warm and dense in a way that filled every room. The table was set with the good plates Lily had taken from the marital home, which she had every right to. And my granddaughter had made a centerpiece out of construction paper leaves because it was fall. We ate pot roast on a Tuesday, and my grandson told me at length about a volcano experiment that had gone impressively wrong in science club. And my granddaughter reported that Biscuit the dog had learned a new trick, and Lily passed the Rosen 20 bread and refilled my glass, and at no point during the meal pressed her fingers against her arm, the way she had done at Sunday dinner 2 years before, when something was wrong, and I hadn't let myself see it. After dinner, my granddaughter asked me to read to her. I read to her for 45 minutes, 2 books through and halfway into a third, until she was asleep with her head against my arm and the stuffed rabbit tucked between us. I sat there in the quiet with my sleeping granddaughter and the sound of my daughter and my grandson doing dishes in the kitchen, their voices low, occasionally laughing at something I couldn't hear. The plan, the one I had made at 4 a.m. in my kitchen 11 months before, had been about justice. I believed in it, and I do not regret it. But this Tuesday, pot roast, construction paper leaves, a child asleep against my arm, this was the thing the plan had been for. I want you to remember that part.